You know, it's very rare for anyone, to find something that truly challenges them in a genuine way. What that may be may vary greatly, but regardless, when you do find something that does challenge you intellectually, spiritually, morally, or emotionally, it can give you a greater insight on the world we live in, or even change who you are as a person. For me, there is only 3 things that I can think of that's ever achieved that for me. The Dino King, the Plague Dogs, uncut, there is a difference, and in this case, Happy Sugar Life. Now, this didn't change who I am as a person, no. But when it was over, it did make me realize just how good my life is and just how lucky I am. But I feel like this gave me better insight and I can now view things without a black and white lens, or at least one that is less biased and a lot more nuanced. This already tells you just how balanced, nuanced, well-written, tactful, and respectfully Happy Sugar Life handles its subject matter and story. Unfortunately, outside of like 4,000 people, they'll just take one good look at it, call it trash with unlikable characters, creepy implications, and say it's barely a step above other stuff like it. This honestly irritates me, because when I hear people say stuff like this, they both understand but misunderstand the point of the story at the same time.
I get it. I don't get it.
This is not a black and white tale. This is one that's shrouded in a lot of gray areas. And when it is black and white with what it shows, it's only done for the stuff it wants to bring attention to. So what I am basically getting at is, this isn't just a good horror story, but a really smart criticism towards a lot of culturally ingrained cliches and stereotypes. And that's why I am here today, to tell you exactly why Happy Sugar Life is not just underrated, but also misunderstood. Now, before we start, I will be focusing on mostly the anime, but I will also be looking at the manga as well, as it does expand on a lot of things the anime doesn't. Cool? Cool. Let's do this, shiz. So, I think it's important we get the basic premise of the series out of the way first. Happy Sugar Life follows a high schooler named Satou, who is popular among the male student body for being someone who likes to, well, as Quagmire puts it, giggity, 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 giggity. But one day, that all changes as she proclaims she's found her true love. Her friends are happy for her, but what no one realizes is that her true love is actually a little girl that Satou found on the streets one night named Shio. And Satou has been keeping her in her apartment under lock and key, and uses Shio to learn what it actually means to love someone and receive love in return. However, keeping their secret isn't easy, because Satou finds herself in almost constant conflict with other people in her city. Metaphorical predators, stalkers, thugs, groomers, creeps who want Shio for their own, less platonic, purposes, as well as the older brother of Shio, Asahi, who is desperately searching for her day in and day out. But in the end, what might end up undoing Satou and her happy sugar life isn't any person found on the street, but her own crumbling psyche, as she desperately clings onto this happiness and refuses to let it go. Now, with that basic premise, if you've never heard of this story, I think I know what you're thinking. But that's the thing. It knows this. It is fully aware that this is not for the faint of heart. But it never once feels like it's being disingenuous or non-sincere about it. And this is where the story's most prominent theme comes in. And it's simply what is love?
Baby, don't hurt me.
Well, Fishmobulus, you may be saying, that's not a difficult question to find an answer for. Everyone knows what love is. But here's the thing. Much like any experience in life, depending on who we ask, almost everyone would have a different answer for what love is. Because, like many things in this messy world, it's different for everyone. How you would love your friend is not necessarily the same way you'd love a significant other, and at the same time, it's also not the same way you would love your child or parent. People will always have bonds with each other, but that does not mean every bond is the same. But, like with anything, there comes the all-too-expected societal norms and expectations for how one is to find love. And it can be boiled down to this. Find your significant other, get hitched, have kids, and let them discover love for themselves. And that certainly works for most people. But Happy Sugar Life asks the question, what happens when this basic plan does not go accordingly? What if someone is not satisfied with their happy life? What if that person is thrown to the side because they're not good enough for that special someone? What if something happens that warps their perception of what love is? What happens when that person finally breaks? And that is where Happy Sugar Life comes in. Happy Sugar Life is an intentional perversion of the all-too-common love at first sight story, in a somewhat similar fashion to how Shrek perverts the common tropes seen in Disney movies at the time. But instead of making something comical, it instead twists it into something more terrifying. And this is where we get to the show's first of two major metaphors that connects all these themes together. A jar of candy. Sugary sweets and jars have a very prominent presence in the story, obviously, if the sugar part didn't give it away. That's because this is a metaphor that Satou and Shio both learned at a young age, and is how they make sense of their warped perceptions of what true love is. The metaphor in question? Love is like candy, because it comes in many flavors. I really like this metaphor because, while it does seem like a huge generalization of things, this does work to show how complicated we, as humans, are, especially when it comes to how we love other people. We show that love to people the only way we know how. And because of that, it comes in all sorts of variations that are pretty much never the same. That's what makes love so great. Some are sweet, and some are mild. However, just because love is involved with something, doesn't mean it's always a positive thing. And Happy Sugar Life focuses on just that. The horrors of love. Or more accurately, the horrors of when love becomes unhealthy. What is the difference between loving someone and being obsessed with them? How does one find love and know what it is, versus them acting upon their own depravities? Because, much like candy, there are certain types of love that are just not appetizing. Some are sour, some are bland and non-existent, some are so warped it's not even recognizable anymore, and some are just plain bitter. This is where the secondary theme of the show takes place. How trauma can change a person, and where the second part of the metaphor finds its prominence. While a person's love may be like candy, a person's heart, on the other hand, is like a jar, empty and waiting to be filled with one of those infinite flavors, or even a mix of multiple flavors. For most, their jar is intact and they go about their daily lives feeling fulfilled. For others, the jar is closed as they chose to love only one thing. Or, alternatively, it's left wide open so they can keep experiencing new forms of love. Some jars are completely empty, and thus the person never truly finds fulfillment. Or maybe, just maybe, the jar is damaged, and if they don't realize this and fix it, the jar will break completely, and they will break along with it. It not only uses this metaphor to show us how a person can be broken physically and mentally, but also show us how it's the most innocent among us who are forever marked by this kind of trauma. And it uses this to discuss a lot of different themes relating to this subject. Abuse, grooming, neglect, love versus obsession, how trauma changes people. The one word I cannot use lest I get this video removed.
Did he just say?
No. Loving kids a little too much, and so on and so forth. But despite juggling all these touchy subjects all at once, in my opinion, it walks that thin line really, really well. It is unflinching with these themes, but I can never once say it was ever done distastefully. It portrays all that happens as not good at best, and downright evil at worst. It's honestly impressive just how well it handles all of what I just said, because it could have easily went either way, just by proxy of what it is. It could have just been a desperate attempt to shock the viewer and drum up controversy with little to no redeeming elements. Or it could have just ended up like Cuties. I think that's enough said regarding that. And I think the reason why it works so well is because of the genre. Happy Sugar Life is a psychological horror thriller that dissects the mentality of our broken, twisted villain protagonist. Compare that to Nymphet.
What is wrong with you?
So, Nymphet has a lot of those same themes and ideas at play, but here's the difference. It portrays it all very differently. For you see, Nymphet is not a horror thriller. It is instead a comedy romance. Isn't it so funny to see this little girl try and make her teacher her romantic partner like how her brother is to her? Why aren't you laughing? Laugh! 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 Yeah, can we agree that this very idea is just not good? I have heard they have since aged this little girl up to 16 years instead of her original 9 or so, but does that really change the intention?
No.
This is why Happy Sugar Life never had any real controversies, while this was riddled with them. Alright, now that we're acquainted with the main themes of Happy Sugar Life and why I think they work, let's talk about... So, now that we know a bit about Happy Sugar Life, let's get into this pile of red-stained sugar even further and see exactly why I think it works so great as a horror story. And the first point of contention is the premise. Now, I don't think it's controversial to say that all horror stories seek to elicit 3 specific types of emotion: fear, shock, and disgust. And it is agreed that there are 5 key elements on how to make a good horror story. Instill a sense of fear in the audience. Include aspects of the unknown. Use cliffhangers throughout your story to hook your audience. Add plot twists to keep your audience thrilled. And the ending, or at least through the story, should have at least a sliver of hope. Let's start with that first one, shall we? I think one of the hardest things to do is elicit a sense of fear, because no matter how scary they are, just ask yourself, can this happen? Chances are, 90% of the time, no. The answer will be no. I mean, take a look at some of the most popular horror stories in the last few decades. A Quiet Place will never happen as long as sound-detecting aliens aren't introduced to Earth's ecosphere. Final Destination will never happen as long as death doesn't decide to be a bitch. Nightmare on Elm Street will never happen as long as serial killers don't invade your dreams. Hell, Night of the Living Dead will never happen as long as the dead never come back to life. And likewise, happy sugar life will never happen as long as there are no demented or depraved individuals that are willing to enact on their darkest desires.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, I was lying about that. Happy Sugar Life doesn't have that problem, because it's a psychological thriller about the horrors that can be found in real life. No ghosts or goblins here, just the most tangible kind of monster that lives among us every day. Homo sapien. And it uses this to tell a very compelling story about the dangers of losing your mind and the importance of protecting yourself and our children. And I think between the adaptations, Happy Sugar Life is able to set up this premise effectively, especially since both set up what the story will be very differently. The manga lets you know right away and makes itself very clear that this is a horror story, showing you Satou is clearly not there in the head, covered in blood. The anime, on the other hand, plays it more subtly, before driving 100 miles per hour into a brick wall with it. It chooses to start off with, well, the ending, showing us where the characters are at, and has Satou basically set the story up from here on out as this funny little story on how they got into this mess. You know, the all-too classic how we got here cliche. You've probably seen this in other places, like the Sonic movie, that one episode of Ed, Ed and Eddie and SpongeBob, and many other similar things like it. It intentionally leads us into believing that's what Happy Sugar Life will be. A happy-go-lucky tragic story about forbidden love, and maybe this child was the product of said love. Only to instead slowly reveal over the course of the episode
What the fuck?
Yep, unlike the manga, which directly tells us you're going to have a bad time, this entire opening is deliberately a bait and switch. And let me tell you, it is an effective bait and switch at that. It leads you to believe it's going to be one thing, but it instead engages you by being something else. I guess you could say it subverts our expectations. And it doesn't stop there. It continues doing this even after the reveal of Shio being a kid. And it's a great example of this story's ability to elicit that primal feeling of discomfort. When we meet them and see what they do together, it looks weird, but nothing on the surface suggests that it would be something I'd be concerned about. As I've mentioned, they just mostly do mundane things together. The weirdest thing they do is exchange vows before bedtime, almost like they're getting married. It's weird, but seems to be something that isn't too abnormal. But for the whole duration of this entire scene, there is a sense of eeriness throughout, despite not being portrayed as such. It isn't until the chapters, or episodes, end that we learn the truth of their situation and realize, oh shit, it all makes sense now. As I've mentioned, Happy Sugar Life is very much a don't judge a book by its cover kind of story, as it tackles a lot of controversial topics and subject matters. And because of this, this story is a master of instilling fear, shock, and disgust. And it's this combination of themes, ideas, and design that is able to get that sense of fear, shroud its tale in the unknown, use cliffhangers and twists to keep the audience engaged, all while doing it in a way that makes sense, while also keeping a glimmer of hope throughout the story. And you can thank the artistic direction, editing, and sound design for that. In general, places like the city during the day, the school, Satou's apartment, or at work, it's well lit and colorful, creating a very welcoming atmosphere. But when it comes to the city at night, Tayo's room, or the aunt's apartment, or even the place Satou works a second job, the world becomes darker and more sinister. A lot of those bright, saturated colors are gone. That welcoming feeling you once had has vanished. replaced with an uncomfortable feeling that screams at you, "You shouldn't be here." Or when something needs to be uncomfortable, the colors dull, the shadows gain more emphasis, with only certain aspects of the characters, like their eyes, being brightly lit with an icy glow. And there are times where you have no idea if you should be happy or disturbed, despite the thing on screen not being something that should be warm or welcoming. The art style changes and becomes less congruent with the overall look of the rest of the world they're in. This is how they portray moments where a character is confused, panicking, or racked with anxiety. Or, in certain cases, they will truly design a character to look otherworldly. Case in point, yeah, just by looking at that guy, you know he doesn't actually look like this, but this is how people see him. An amorphous monster that brings only pain and misery, and takes great pleasure in doing so. But it doesn't just stop there, because that same mentality is also used to emphasize what the characters are feeling as well. And this is where the sound design and music is used to great effect. Following the same theory that studios like Pixar use, it creates certain motifs that are reused or changed in a way to fit the mood of the scene at hand. By following a consistent set of notes, they make the soundtrack and main motif of the story very memorable and help each scene stick out. When the characters are happy, the music picks up and becomes something almost akin to a music box, helping make the already colorful, bright, and happy scene even more welcoming. When it wants to be mysterious, hint at, and set things up to be later revealed, the music will slow down and become a lot more ominous to fit the mood. When it gets uncomfortable, it uses specific soundtracks and audio distortion to portray the moment of someone's broken mind. In layman's term, the soundtrack can drastically go from cutesy and upbeat to eerie and terrifying on the flip of a dime. Kind of like our main heroine. What? Who said that? But I personally think there are two prominent tracks in the series worth discussing. The first being Words of Oath, referring to the promise originally made between the three members of the Kobe family. This would later go on to be used by Shio as a promise to forever stay with Satou, the woman that had become her new family. And as such, it only plays when Satou and Shio finds genuine comfort in each other, or a truly deep moment between them occurs. This comes in many different variations throughout the series. The obvious big dramatic one, the church organ one, the cosmic music box one, and even two unreleased melancholic versions I was able to rip the audio from. The other soundtrack, and by far my personal favorite horror soundtrack, would without a doubt be Nigai, 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 translating to bitter, bitter, bitter. This is legit one of the most nerve-wracking soundtracks I've heard, period. Its instrumentals are ear-grating and unnatural. It's disturbingly out of place within the rest of the show's OSTs, even amongst the other horror tracks. And whereas Words of Oath is a soundtrack that invokes happiness and comfort, this, on no uncertain terms, is the danger theme. And it only plays when moments of great anxiety or real danger take place. This is the most psychological soundtrack of the bunch, and needless to say, I love it so much, and I think it easily stands up there with some of the all-time most iconic horror themes. Move over, Freddy. There's a new queen in town. What makes these specific tracks work is that they are not just used sparingly, but are used for very specific moments to reflect the soundtrack in question. But at the same time, there are also a lot of scenes where the music is absent and allows the scene and atmosphere to just sink in. Compared to most other horror things, you will almost always have music blaring everywhere you go, especially in moments where Bitter 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 will play. The way it's implemented is genuinely nerve-wracking and unsettling, in a way most horror and thrillers could dream of. When it wants you to feel confusion, anxiety, or horror, it does so without ever feeling like it's just being for the sake of being. And I, for one, believe this is Happy Sugar Life's greatest strength. Its ability to hold itself back and just let the situations build that fear for you. So much so that what it merely implies is more disturbing than just outright showing it. That brief peck Shio gives Satou, and Satou stating she can taste chocolate on her mouth, is all you need to elicit disgust. You don't need to show these two going further than that to get the point across. It's genuinely disturbing without having to cross that line. What I am trying to say is, just because something is controversial doesn't mean it's garbage. There is a difference between trying to be controversial for the sake of controversy, and being a well-written story that's controversial because the way it treats the people reading or watching like a reasoning, thinking adult. Crap like this just wants to shock you because it has nothing else to offer. This, on the other hand, does offer something. It never sugarcoats anything. And when it does sugarcoat something, it is with the intention of showing it from the mindset of someone's psychotic mind. A mind that is damaged, traumatized, or was deprived of any feeling of care or genuine companionship in their entire life. And nowhere can that be felt more than through its main storytelling lens. This is a tale told through Satou's eyes. And so, this story is portrayed as how Satou, our villain protagonist, sees everything. As a result, we're stuck with an unreliable narrator who will make the most disturbing things look more beautiful than they actually are, and paint the other characters in whatever light she wants them to be in. As such, we are forced to see the story from a viewpoint that actively tries to justify all the stuff she does, and doesn't think she's doing anything wrong at all. We can't trust anything we see or hear in this story, and even what we believe is happening, we can't trust that because we're stuck going off of tainted information. So much so that, at points, more often than not, even people who don't like Satou have admitted that they actually started rooting for her at points, despite all the outright evil things she's done. But it does make sense. This is not a typical good guy versus slasher, monster, or ghost story. This is a story that pits your moral compass against the main character's moralities. And with that context, the moment you find yourself rooting or sympathizing with her, she wins. I unfortunately lost. But as the YouTuber Loveduru put it, with some mild paraphrasing of my own, Happy Sugar Life doesn't make you fear our main character. It makes you fear yourself. After all, it was you who sympathized with Satou, and, in a way, agreed with what she was doing. But it doesn't just stop there, because it also uses its subject matter to basically deconstruct a lot of common tropes you see in anime and media in general. The biggest example is the media's portrayal of romance. Be it the top dogs or undergrads, all things that focus on love and romance tend to show it as a beautiful thing, something that is truly pure and will magically fix all your problems. Which, don't get me wrong, it's not a bad thing. It's good that people can widely agree on something. But the thing is, that's really the only side of love that's shown. And like all things, love is far from simple. After all, romance does have two definitions, the one we all know, and the second being a quality or feeling of mystery, excitement, and remoteness from everyday life. And that's what Happy Sugar Life looks at. It shows us the darkest side of love, how depraved it can be, how there will be those who exploit another person's love for their own benefit. There will be people who will give up everything for love and not receive it in return. There will be those who only stick around pretending to love someone until that person is unable to provide anything for them. Or maybe, in some of the more f***ed up cases, they're forced into it by their own families for the family's sake. Or, more aptly, sometimes some forbidden romances are forbidden for a very good reason. With that said, is it any wonder why love is often called the most dangerous game? After all, just like many things, romance is still subject to interpretation. Who's to say your idea of love is similar to the person next to you, or the one next to them? Love can be very complicated, and for every positive thing it can bring, there comes the possibility of it bringing out some toxic traits and emotions as well. Dependence, obsession, jealousy, control, to just name a few. And all of it is shown at the absolute peak of their worst here. I will go into this aspect more when talking about our pink-haired yandere, but know that every character in some way personifies each of these negative traits, if not more. This is a minor but just as prominent theme in Happy Sugar Life, as basically everyone, except, well, maybe one person, misinterprets what it means to actually love someone, and what they think is love compels them to commit or aid in horrible things. And this is what causes everyone around them to suffer. Which leads us to... Buckle up, duckies, because this is going to be a long one. While I wouldn't call it a stacked roster, there is plenty to talk about regarding the cast of Happy Sugar Life. It is a unique one because you're not actually supposed to like most of these peeps, but still understand where they come from. In other words, it's a case of empathy versus sympathy. Empathy being where you can understand how someone might feel or even imagine yourself in their shoes without necessarily having to feel whatever they might be feeling yourself, while sympathy means you share the same feeling that person may be experiencing. Okay, to give you an example, I feel sympathy for Poe, for being bullied, and I can understand why he feels the way he does. But with Tai Lung, regardless of his wicked actions throughout the film and prior to, I can empathize with him feeling gypped out of the Dragon Scroll, something he was promised since childhood. You see the difference, right? One is where you can relate, while the other is where you simply understand. And that perfectly fits almost all of these people to a T. So let's talk about them. How about we start off with the truly sympathetic characters? Starting off with our heroic antagonist, Asahi Kobe. Yep, heroic antagonist versus villain protagonist. Strange, isn't it? Asahi, along with his sister, Shio, were born to a family where the husband would abuse the crap out of them for even the most minor of things. And the entire family just lived in fear as a result. Realizing their situation was not going to improve, he and his mother came up with a plan. She would run away with Shio, and he'd stay behind to prevent their father from following. And when the time was right, he'd find them and they could be a family again. As you could imagine, this had a pretty dire effect on him, but Asahi held on to hope. and was able to make it through each and every day because the promise he made to his mother and sister motivated him. He would endure all the tortures his father could come up with for 5 years, because he knew one day soon his nightmare will end. So, as you can imagine, when he found his father dead one day, seemingly having drank himself to oblivion, he was excited. He could finally be with his family. His years of suffering are over, only to discover that only his mother remained in a decrepit apartment that Shio was nowhere to be found in. He would not let this stand. After all the pain, the suffering, and how he feels that he was too late for his mother, he holds on to hope once again that if he finds Shio, they together can fix all that is broken. That at least they together can be a family. And despite being homeless, having nowhere to go, and no real reason to keep on living, he still doesn't give up hope on finding his sister. She is all he has now, and truly believes by finding her, he can prevent her from growing up to be like him. Never once choosing to get the proper authorities involved in the search because of his fear and distrust of adults, due to his abuse. It's not hard to see why he'd think that, though, after all the years of unspeakable horrors enacted upon him. So while he definitely has a good motivation, it's also pretty clear he put all of his eggs in one basket. Or, more accurately, all of his candy in one jar, and refuses to even consider putting at least one piece in another. This is why I sympathize with Asahi. His backstory and what he's doing is understandable, but as we learn later, it might actually be a bit misguided. But for now, let's move on to the second most important person to Asahi, Shoko Hida. Shoko is someone who looks up to Satou dearly and attributes a lot of her own personal growth to her. They originally met when Satou was still hooking up with men every night, and Shoko joined her as a form of rebellion against her strict parents. She cares for Satou so much, she only wants to be involved in what she is doing, despite every instinct telling her not to. Because Satou is her best friend. So much so that when she believes she is responsible for ruining their apparent friendship by not responding to one of Satou's questions, she breaks down. But things aren't all bad. She does become good friends with Asahi, kindling a more genuine, unconditional friendship with him, maybe becoming something even more to him. Shoko is someone who, even though not shown directly in the anime, is made clear she has no real sense of freedom due to her family life, and having a part-time job and getting freaky with others is her own form of rebellion. It's interesting because, from what the manga shows us, she should have had the most fulfilling and best life out of all the characters. She was rich, she was secured, she's on top of the world! But she isn't, because when it comes to living the high life, there comes higher expectations. And more often than not, the more expectations you have, the less personal freedom you'll have in return. And that is the boat Shoko is in. She just wants to feel free and be her own person. It's kind of obvious that a lot of those insecurities might have actually come from such a controlled life, and it always bleeds into everything she does. She's unable to bring herself to say things directly. She'll blame herself for little things. It's this that results in her friendship with Satou being sullied, when her lack of response makes her believe she's rejected her after learning what Satou's upbringing and living situation is like. And this drives Shoko into intense sadness. So much so, she believes she doesn't deserve to live. Shoko is broken but in a way that is truly sympathetic. Speaking of which, let's get started on the characters I would call empathetic, but not sympathetic. Taiyo was just a normal guy working at a part-time job and going to school, until he was kidnapped and molested by his former manager for a week straight. This traumatized the poor guy, and it caused him to develop a fear of older women. Taiyo has clearly gone through something that left him scarred, to the point it's not even clear if he's actually confided in anyone, even his own family, in what happened to him. He just locks himself away due to his trauma, and when he does come out, he finds it hard as his new phobia makes basic interactions basically impossible. Okay, scratch that. He did open up to one person, Shoko. But let's be honest, the way he put it then and there was uncomfortable at best. As you can imagine, because of this fear, he is sometimes used as a form of comic relief. But here's the thing, and it's important to note. While he has some comedic moments, Taiyo himself is never mocked or torn down for the trauma he endured. His reactions to others may be portrayed as awkwardly comedic, but what happened to him is never portrayed as such. It ruined his life, and the story is very sincere about that. And it basically acts as a criticism towards how most media will just show this exact same thing as something to laugh at. Speaking of which, let's talk about that. In media and pop culture, men being sexually assaulted or harassed is so normalized and commonplace that no matter where you go, someone will always make some sort of joke about it. You name it. Nutty Professor 2, horrible bosses, and even the friggin' Oscars.
And why does a prisoner drop the soap? 'Cause no one wants to do it alone.
All portray what should be a genuinely horrible action as comedic. In some cases, it's even worse because they'll play it both ways in the same series. Look no further than Croissant. Bad when it happens to the woman, funny when the exact same thing happens to a man.
You dirty animal! I didn't mean to, I swear!
And it doesn't even stop there, because this garbage, albeit watered down, will also show up in a lot of kids' content as well. And no matter the form, it always seeks to just make fun of the man for just being a victim. Oh, and the real stinger to all of this? If you were to swap the genders around and try that same crap or something similar with a female, you will be declared an enemy of world peace. And I feel like it's only gotten worse in our obscenely woke era, where demeaning men to make their female counterparts look good is commonplace. But Happy Sugar Life laughs in the face of jokes like this. Instead, Happy Sugar Life looks at this and says, "Fuck this shit, I'm out," and instead portrays the victim as a victim, and showing the long-term ramifications of this event and how others will exploit or view his trauma. It's the creator's way of telling the one reading or watching that if you think this is funny, then why don't you find the opposite just as hilarious? What I am saying is, this story wants you to think, viewer! And hopefully remember this the next time you see something like it. But continuing with that notion, it also sends the message that predators can come in many forms, and aren't always how they look in media. Predators aren't back alley dwellers lurking in the shadows. More often than not, they are someone you know personally. So as you can imagine, finding that rare piece of media that goes against this genuinely fucked up form of comedy is like finding manna from heaven. But as you could have figured out by now, given what section of the video we're on, I can fully empathize with Taiyo and his trauma. But I do not sympathize with him for one single reason. He not only developed a fear of old ladies because of this, but he also developed an obsessive infatuation with younger girls, particularly Shio, as he believes that if he finds her, she would have the power to purify him of his tainted body. Yeah, Taiyo has come to see Shio as a therapy object. Kind of like a therapy animal or a doll of sorts. Something that helps him cope with the trauma he endured and maybe even gives him some motivation to keep on going. However, it's pretty clear that something else is going on with him as well, even if he doesn't know what that thing is himself. We see this very clearly after a brief moment where he does find Shio, only to lose her shortly after. These feelings only intensify. Something Satou figures out pretty quickly, and is able to use his very confused desires to her own benefit, as a way to help him keep others away from Shio, while also keeping Shio away from him. And given their last encounter in the park, I think that's probably for the best. Going on a short tangent, I think scenes like this are honestly a lot more anxiety-inducing than most scenes in a horror movie. But regardless, it's easy to empathize with Taiyo and the trauma he endured. But I don't think it's okay to sympathize with him, especially with how he copes with it. Because, much like what's expected, he just wants Shio to fulfill his own fantasy about fixing his ruined form. I will make this part about Sumair quick because, well, she doesn't have much of a presence outside of a small role later on. Sumair is Satou and Shoko's co-worker, who despises everything about herself and will actively creep on Satou's personal supply and life in order to learn more about her, so she can be just like Satou. But this ends up being used against her when Satou sees a chance to manipulate her, to get her to stay out of their happy sugar life.
He said it!
By faking a mutual love towards her, building up confidence in Sumair and making her feel better about being herself, and even comforting her as she cries, telling her that there's no such thing as perfect. All of this to get Sumair under her thumb. Sumair is interesting, because she is someone that does something genuinely wrong, but is the first of only two characters who actually let that go after she finds what seemingly fixes that problem. The person she thinks of as her significant other. While I do empathize with Sumair with feeling crappy about herself, trust me, there are plenty of aspects about who I am that I'm not exactly happy about. I don't sympathize with her on the fact she would creep on others like some kind of stalker. However, the fact she was 100% willing to stop doing that, and, as we learn in a following episode, she was genuine on that, I can't say she was entirely unsympathetic, but I can at least understand why she would want to improve on her own self-perceived flaw. Speaking of which, we're going to talk about Yuna. Yuna is the mother of Asahi and Shio, who became pregnant after a man she never met raped her. And because it was too late to abort Asahi, both her family and the man's family agreed he should marry her so he can take responsibility for his actions, which led to her life becoming a living hell, as she and her children would constantly be tormented and abused on a very regular basis, something that is implied he takes great joy in doing. In the anime, this is never shown, and it is simply implied she married the wrong man and did not realize it until it was too late. The manga, on the other hand, does give us a backstory, and it goes in a lot more depth with her character. But I also think this entire backstory is personally the weakest part of Happy Sugar Life. I'm sorry for doing this, but it's time for my first ever tangent time. Skip to this point in the video to get on with it. To me, all this does is expand on the backstory of what is essentially a non-character that serves no real purpose other than filling in bits of backstory for Shio and Asahi in the same vein as Batman's parents do. I am not against this, but considering it puts the main story on pause at the beginning of the third act during one of the most important moments of the story, it just breaks up the flow of the scene and it does not feel like it was naturally integrated. So much so that I'm honestly convinced it was just thrown in there as a way to differentiate itself from the anime, which was still being produced while the manga was on hiatus. And that is just ignoring how anything that is portrayed with Yuna is already done with other characters that are actual players in the story. Yuna was raped by someone and that traumatized her to the point of being unable to function as a normal individual? Well, we have Tayo for that. Yuna was relentlessly abused for a good majority of her life? Asahi was as well, and you can throw Satou in there as well for reasons we'll get into later. Yuna was forced to live with someone who clearly should not have been given the right to be with them. Once again, little old Satou and her aunt. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think having a character be forced into marriage fits well within the themes of Happy Sugar Life. This too can be seen as a criticism of love, particularly when some people are never allowed to find it and are just forced into it for whatever reason. But at the same time, I don't know. I know it was the husband who forced himself onto her, but given that he only did that because Yuna did not pay attention to her surroundings for 5 seconds, implies that half of this is her fault. What? I know this was probably not the intention, but I think it would have worked a lot better if Yuna just went home, saw that her family arranged her wedding behind their back, and we just see the repercussions of it afterwards. Also, boo! They gave the husband a face. Boo! When we first see him as that ominous Tokyo Ghoul reject, it's scary because this design directly contradicts everything else we see in the manga and anime. He represents how Asahi sees this man, the devil. But more importantly, he's supposed to not have a face because he represents how this thing could be anyone. Your friend, your family member, maybe even you. So giving this guy a face was like giving the Joker an actual identity outside of the Joker, or giving the Onceler a face. This character was made to represent how this could literally be anyone. But by giving him a face, you basically ruin this subtle idea by giving him his own identity, and thus ruining the idea that this could be anyone, because he's clearly not just anyone. But one fish ma borba lupus, you may be asking. They clearly couldn't tell this backstory without showing his face. That would be too difficult. Except they immediately start hiding his face again after we see it. Why can't they just scribble it out like they did with Yuna in Shio's hallucinations, or better yet, keep him as that sleep paralysis demon that we see him as? This just feels like it was done to differentiate itself from the anime, like I said earlier. And honestly, this might be a hot take, but I honestly think the anime removing Yuna's backstory made it work a lot better in hindsight. Yeah, it leaves out certain details, but I wasn't lost at any moment when watching the series. But in return, it also leaves more space for interpretation. Why did they get married? Maybe Yuna in the anime just liked him initially, only to learn of his true colors once they were married, and everyone just suffers the consequences of that one bad choice in partner. It's not a bad backstory, I just wish it was its own one-shot or even epilogue. Most of which were left out of the anime, but also don't take too much away from it either. But, like I said, this is the weakest part of Happy Sugar Life, not the worst. And it still gives us important insight on Yuna, because while it's never outright said, it's implied she resents both of her children, for had she not gotten pregnant or just spoken up about it before the abortion cutoff, she wouldn't be in this mess. But because things turned out the way they did, she had to suffer for years as a result. And while Shio would become a beacon of hope for her and Asahi, the years of abuse she had endured with her parents' consent inflicted many scars on her, metaphorically and literally. She went from a person who was basically capable of doing anything to being unable to do the most simple of things. She is unable to hold down any kind of job as a result of her trauma, and could not make enough income to support her or Shio. And because of that, even though she does care about her kids, she is unable to show that to Shio when it mattered the most, and it affected them both greatly. All of this would finally culminate in Yuna finally breaking, and abandoning Shio, simply telling her she doesn't need her anymore. She could have given Shio to foster care. She could have done all sorts of other things, but she instead does probably the worst thing a parent could do to their child. She may be broken, she may be a victim herself, but this truly is unforgivable, and even the other characters acknowledge this. And it is because of this reason that I lose all sympathy for her. But with everything that happened to her, I cannot say that I don't empathize with her. Of course, there is more to this story, but let's save that for later. Now that we've gotten through the sympathetic and empathetic, let's talk about the truly irredeemable monsters.
What took you so long, idiot?
Let's talk about Daichi Kitumakawa, but I'll just call him the teacher from here on out. I'll also be combining Satou's manager into this segment as well, as she really is just a non-element. Both the teacher and manager of the Princess Imperial are people who want to fulfill their own fantasies, even without someone's consent. The teacher is well respected, and lives an overall good life with a wife and kid. But in the off hours, he secretly likes going after minors because he is both unsatisfied with the life he lives, and because he likes the risk that comes with possibly being caught. Both the teacher and the boss are one in the same. They want to receive other people's affection, pleasure, and so on and so forth again, without having to give anything back in return. They want dominance. That's it. Once again, going back to what I said about the main theme of the series, this is a negative trait that can come with love. Or, more accurately, when love becomes lust. When you become obsessed, or maybe even addicted to something that loving someone gave you, but it just wasn't enough. You need to have more, no matter what. And this is how things like people cheating on their significant others can happen. Or, more aptly for this situation, what the teacher and manager are doing. They force themselves onto others because they believe they deserve the love of everyone, even though absolutely no one would give it to them if they knew what was really going on. So, as you can imagine, he tries this shit on Satou, and it goes about as well as you'd expect. And he is even less prepared for just how psychotic she is, threatening to blow the whistle if he does not stay out of her life, and to help her dispose of some mysterious garbage bags she has. But this doesn't chase him off. The sheer danger and terror he felt from Satou in that moment, and the threat of losing everything, including his masculinity, actually excites him in a way he never felt before. And, once again, he needs more. And he figures the best way to do this would be to blow the cover off of Satou's dirty little secret. Because you see, she supposedly lives with her aunt, but the aunt hasn't been seen in a long time. 3 garbage bags filled with something that Satou says the teacher is better not knowing what it is. An empty apartment with a single teen and a child with no adults.
I need an adult.
I am an adult!
And no biological parents. That seems quite sus to me, dog. So he gets the police involved, saying there's a terrible smell coming from the apartment, just so he can get it off to Satou's ultimate defeat. And so, with some hesitation, Satou lets them in, and shows them what's in the apartment.
Satou no oba desu ga.
Yep, the aunt is not dead, which means his plan backfired and he finally leaves Satou alone after a second, much shorter confrontation. But the cat's out of the bag. The aunt is not dead, though Satou undoubtedly wishes that she was. Yeah, just by looking at her, you can see that both have a similar persona. Kind and caring on the outside, but a complete psycho on the inside. The main difference being, Satou tends to keep to herself, while the aunt will try to force herself onto others to fulfill her own desires in experiencing someone else's idea of love. Like when she forced herself onto an officer right in front of everyone. She was able to get him to stop struggling just by talking to him and, in her own way, possibly digging into his own personal desires. The best way I can describe her is that the aunt is basically a succubus given human form. Someone who seeks out intimacy in order to feed on their love. Those two words are obvious metaphors for things I cannot say here on YouTube. I mean, just look at that face. That's the kind of face that says,
Bad touch! Bad touch! Stranger danger!
Hence why she would allow a young Satou to be exposed to the various acts she'd have with others. At this point, it's good to note every time Satou's experienced anxiety or extreme distress, these moments are often accompanied by images of the aunt, implying that the aunt exposing Satou to this stuff was not just an accident, but was her attempt to make Satou her own personal butt buddy, as I'll put it. And this is what played a huge part in making Satou the way she is now. She deprived Satou of anything that she could become attached to that wasn't her, forcing her to live in the same room she dumps her garbage in, and presumably got rid of anything Satou retained from her birth family. Basically, these are all the steps that need to be taken to deprive someone of a childhood of any kind. All of this just in an attempt to get Satou to love her and only her. Sort of like how Satou only wants Shio to love her and only her. But enough about side characters. I think it's time we finally talk about obviously, I have a lot more to say about these two specifically, so they get to have their own segment. At its core, Happy Sugar Life is an intense and distorted take on unconventional love. So much so, it is Satou's obsession for Shio that drives the plot forward, creating what is very much a dark and deeply twisted romance. Obviously, they're challenging conventional storytelling by doing this, but it also makes Satou a much more layered character as a result. As I have mentioned earlier, Satou is not the hero, but the people writing this story worked their asses off to make sure they didn't end up painting her like one. This is important to note, so keep that in mind. Regardless of that, she is easily the most interesting character to discuss out of the bunch. She lost her parents when she was young and was forced to live with her sadomasochistic aunt. And as previously mentioned, because of her aunt's depraved idea of what love is, she ultimately denied Satou any genuine feeling of being loved from an early age. To the point she didn't even know what love was. That was until she met Shio. All of a sudden, for the first time in her life, she felt something, and quickly became addicted to it, becoming obsessed over this 8-year-old child. The past traumas she endured and the mental scars she carries only add to her distorted perception of what love is. Because of this, her actions, her morality, everything she does is driven by this obsession for Shio. And, in her eyes at least, blurs the lines between right and wrong for her. It's also good to note that while Satou definitely is fond of Shio, she is never shown to have any intimate feelings for Shio. Heck, it's basically the other way around. I'm getting off topic. She assumes this feeling of joy she has is true love, and only discovers what it really means to love someone when it's far too late. As I mentioned, the story of Happy Sugar Life seeks to challenge societal expectations and norms surrounding love and relationships and all that stuff. And the main crux of that comes from Satou's unconventional approach to love. Because of this, Satou basically embodies a lot of uncomfortable themes and taboo topics, and forces us, the viewer or reader, to confront the darker side of human emotion. I always find it interesting when we delve into the mind of our main character and see their inner workings. That's why I ranked Doctor Strange so high on my Marvel animation ranking. And it's no different here. Satou, as a character, is far from simple, because she has a lot of profound depth to her character, specifically when we look at her from a psychological standpoint. And the anime's and manga's exploration of Satou's psyche as she grapples with the consequences of her actions only add more layers of complexity to her character, her morality, and helps build up a better understanding of her motivations. All while creating a character that blurs the line and outright challenges the traditional notions and ideas of heroism and villainy. For you see, she's not just a regular run-of-the-mill villain. She is what we call an anti-villain. A villain with altruistic tendencies that, while not necessarily a good person, more often than not, is often the one to stand up against generally worse individuals. Heck, her first murder was not done out of a selfish desire. She did it to protect Shio. You see, the apartment they live in together once belonged to an unnamed individual, someone who was attracted to the emptiness in Satou's heart. But after seeing the happiness Shio brought Satou, he went to remedy this, Bart Simpson style, only for Satou to intervene. So yes, what she does is not right. But it clearly comes from a place that could be considered, in a weird, sick way, well-intended. And her obsession to keep Shio safe and happy could arguably come from two places. The first being her desire to have someone she can genuinely care about in her life and have them love her back just the same. And the second being a desire to keep them safe from the same things she experienced as a kid herself. In other words, she's basically keeping Shio like one would a doll or a support animal. And even though she knows what she is doing is wrong, she always keeps trying to justify it to herself by saying stuff like, "God will forgive me for what I'm doing is for love." This actually makes her more in line with a villain like Frollo from Hunchback, more so than someone like Yuna Gasai. And it's honestly a fair comparison. They are both in the wrong, they know what they are doing is wrong, but they keep trying to find a way to justify it. It's great for showing us how much of a tortured and confused soul she is, and that while she's obsessed with that feeling of happiness, she does everything to try and preserve Shio's innocence and purity. In a way, how she treats Shio and the connection she has with her is more like a surrogate mother of sorts. A very concerning kind of mother, but a mother nonetheless, whose main priority is to protect and provide for their child. So when she agrees to marry Shio, I get the sense she's doing it more so as a way to play along with her, while not having to worry about saying their vows to each other every single night. Win-win. And the ways she's able to keep Shio all to herself is actually quite impressive. She doesn't use brute force or fear. She is instead a very clever, resourceful person that is able to adapt to what the situation demands, and is almost prepared for just about anything. When faced with adversity, we get to see her strategic and determined mind at work, and it's quite impressive. I guess now would be a good time to discuss it. The story cleverly uses a lot of culturally ingrained stereotypes and biases to make Satou look less like a predator and more like a good person. And it mainly does this to make the audience see the hypocrisy that comes with it. At first glance, I'm pretty sure most people would happily call Taiyo a creep, and rightfully so. Yet, a lot of those same people don't see Satou as something similar, despite being arguably just as bad as what he's doing. Why is that? For many reasons, really. Firstly, the story subtly uses its visuals to elicit an immediate bias people may have when consuming media. For example, with Satou, look at her! Pink hair, bright colors, petite, she's a well-respected student, she's actually a very kind person when she's, not going full psycho, and she even works at a maid cafe where she dresses like a cute little animal serving cakes to customers. On the surface, she's adorable. Compare that to Asahi, the much larger homeless boy with darker colors who is covered in bandages and sleeps under park benches who came from an abusive household. On the surface, if you were to show some random stranger a picture of these two, they would probably assume Asahi was the villain, when that couldn't be farther from the truth. In other words, if it looks cute, people are more likely to fall for it, more than the thing that isn't. And that's why people don't want pandas to be the poster boy for endangered animals anymore. I'm getting off track again. The second reason is that to make Satou look good, they pit her against arguably worse people, like the teacher and her manager. Both are just overblown versions of Satou's most negative traits as a person. The teacher, specifically, is the textbook example of a sex predator. He is someone who uses his authority over his students to get what he wants, and uses the fact that a lot of students like him to his advantage. He picks his prey, he stalks them, he fantasizes about what he wants to do with them, and of course, he is just an overall creep. One who openly admits to cheating on his wife because he wants to be loved by lots of people, and even directly compares himself to Satou, on the basis they both got laid with a bunch of other students. Regardless of what you think about Satou, this is naturally not a fair comparison, because 1. Satou was single when she was getting laid. 2. She didn't force herself onto others or use the fact people liked her to get laid. And 3. Once Satou found Shio, someone she cared for deeply regardless of how unnatural it is, she stopped getting giggity with other people and rejected that lifestyle now that she has Shio. So by directly comparing Satou to people like this, they are actually working to make Satou look less terrible by comparison. With the teacher, it's pretty obvious what his role is. He is the stereotypical idea of what a predator is, to contrast against Satou's less obvious status as one, despite both of them basically doing the same thing. The manager, on the other hand, reflects Satou's own possessiveness over Shio.
And with these hands, I hold the fate of millions.
But by contrast, where she forced herself onto Taio and held him against his will, Satou doesn't even think about going any further with Shio other than platonic bath time, nor does she keep her locked up against her will. While the teacher reflects the impropriety of her relationship with Shio and the manager her unhealthy desires, the difference here being Satou truly believes that she and Shio are partners on equal footing. Yes, she is an amoral creep, but when compared to the teacher, the manager, and even the aunt,
ただの可愛い子供なのよ。
need I say more? This is a way that this story makes you think. They have two people doing creepy things with minors, but because Satou is so adorable and is out there arguably fighting the good fight, people will brush off what she does like it's nothing. And by proxy, a lot of those people see what she does with Shio as cute, when, let's be honest, it's not. And to be fair, she really isn't an irredeemable monster. We do get to focus on some of her positive traits after all. She's not a megalomaniacal villain who wants wealth, power, or even the tri-state area. She only wants to live a simple, happy life with Shio, as unsettling as it may be. And frankly, I don't think that's something anyone couldn't relate to. She works hard, up to the point of basically self-harm, just to support the both of them. She will even step in to protect others on occasion, even if she doesn't particularly care for them by the story's beginning or end. And when compared to the other nut jobs in the show, she's probably the only one with the most self-control. Now don't get me wrong, the story doesn't shy away from their negative traits either. Obviously, nor does it excuse them. Any attempts at making her this tragic figure is solely done to explain why she is the way that she is, and no other reason. Well, outside of building sympathy, of course. But this is why we see the story mainly from her perspective. Because without that point of view, then all we'd have is a surface level look at the character. She is no angel, but she's clearly someone that's desperately looking to find some happiness in life. After all, as she puts it, once she feels genuine love, she will be satisfied. I already mentioned that she is somewhat similar to Frollo, but what I think makes Satou work better as a villain is because we get to see the story through her eyes and experience her thought process. It is for this reason why she keeps Shio. This is a chance for her to learn and maybe know what it means to feel love. And all she wants Shio to do is be happy. Because even on the worst days, seeing Shio happy is what makes it all worthwhile to her. Unlike Frollo, who was mainly just horny for Esmeralda. I know there are people out there who will look at her and say, she's just a psychopath. But no, man. She is a broken person confused about the world, trying to make sense of emotions she's never experienced before, and is only going about it in the only way she ever really knew. In a weird way, this really is a give and take for the two. Shio gives Satou a reason to live, and in return, Satou does the same for Shio. Speaking of which, let's talk about her now. While Satou may be portrayed as this morally complicated thing, as I'll simply put it, Shio, on the other hand, is portrayed as this truly innocent being. She has a way of brightening up or bringing joy to people around her just by being in her presence. Much like Satou, Shio is obsessed with the former. But whereas I can explain Satou's connection to her a bit more easily, Shio's infatuation, on the other hand, is a bit more complicated, needless to say. Shio is the one that gets Satou to do a lot of the more suspect things in the show and anime, and it does indicate a romantic interest in her. Which, given Shio's canonical age, is at that point where she would start feeling those emotions, by proxy of that wretched curse known as puberty. But at the same time, I wouldn't say her feelings for Satou are entirely romantic, because I feel Shio most likely sees Satou as a sort of one-all to be-all to end-all. She probably sees her as a romantic interest, a big sister, a surrogate mother. You get my point. As such, when she says, "let's get married," it's more like a young child understanding it as simply a promise to be together forever, with no idea of what it actually entails. Because of that, it doesn't come off as gross or weird. Okay, it's still very, very weird, but like I said earlier, it does come off more like a mother just playing along with her child, or a sister with her sibling. For the most part, at least, but these possible feelings for Satou undoubtedly stem from her upbringing. While both were traumatized by it, whereas Asahi held on to hope despite his ongoing suffering, Shio, on the other hand, was left heartbroken by all that happened. She barely has any recollection of her life before Satou, and any memories of her mother she may have is that of the various moms that would raise her. Scary, sad, and kind. But the one memory that undoubtedly sticks out to her the most was when Yuna, her own mother, struck her out of frustration in the same way their father would strike her. As such, Shio's main impression of her mother was someone that was cold, distant, and just ultimately didn't care about her. And while Yuna was a victim herself, she was indeed distant from Shio, and cared more about the day Asahi would return to them instead of the child she was currently taking care of. This left such a bad impression on Shio, she ended up repressing all of those memories, to the point only what came after is what she really remembers, which was only cemented when she was deserted by Yuna, who, must I remind you, simply told her, Shio was truly, truly alone. But fate has a funny way of bringing people together, because not even around the corner, Satou was close by to witness the whole ordeal. It was this night that Satou and Shio first met. Satou, being her distant and apathetic self at the time, just talks to Shio, and Shio tells her that she's not following. Obviously confused, she asks Shio, "Is that what love is?" before explaining the most basic idea of what love is to Shio. This inadvertently makes Shio break down. She wanted to fix her mother's jar, but only now does she realize she never wanted to fix it because she loved her. She only wanted to fix it so she could have a reason to keep on living. Also, kudos to Shio's voice actor. I don't know how to speak Japanese, but this does sound like a crying child. But in that moment, Shio is able to read Satou like a picture book. She can see that Satou's heart isn't broken, just empty, and it's able to keep from breaking because she believes in something. And that tiny bit of hope is what keeps it strong. Unlike the mother, who basically gave up on hope long ago. Moved by what she said, these genuine, kind, and honest words are what finally did it for Satou. She finally felt something. This feeling she just had has to be true love, is what she thought. But also, in that moment, Satou very likely saw a kindred spirit in Shio. So, without hesitation, and with Shio's permission, Satou takes Shio in. And because of that, their days of loneliness came to an end. And at first, she did try to get help from someone else. That didn't work out too well. But after that roadblock, both started exchanging the vows Shio would make to her family and stay with each other ever since. Yes, it's still not necessarily a good arrangement, but it's pretty clear at this point this is not as black and white as it was initially. Shio was basically unwanted, and Satou took her in, and Shio accepted. Satou is definitely not the ideal caretaker, but she was able to give Shio what they needed. And since Yuna strictly forbade her from going outside under any circumstance, it makes sense as to why she doesn't acknowledge her imprisonment in Satou's apartment as such. Actually, that's a neat little parallel between the two. The one time Shio and Yuna went outside together, Shio nearly died due to her lack of experience with the outside world, and Yuna got upset by this, which led to the aforementioned slap. Satou, on the other hand, despite Shio leaving with no provocation or knowledge of her whereabouts, does not show any anger, just joy that she is safe. Once again, this is a better by comparison at work. After all, as Tayo explained, family is someone you care about and is always with you. And Satou is the closest thing to an actual family Shio felt she truly had. And their shared history with familial abuse only made them, let's be honest, compatible with each other. They are two sides of the same coin, and every haiku at the end of every episode, once put together, takes on a new form and context once you realize it's Satou and Shio talking to each other, almost like a conversation between the two, one that gives us a good look into the minds of both characters. I'm sure this is love. I'd do anything to protect this feeling. Even if I cry, even if I scream, even if I cover my ears or close my eyes, there's this vision that never disappears. Ever since I met Shio-chan, I keep changing. See? I learned a new emotion tonight too. Those who violate love must pay the price. Such a sin can only be atoned for with punishment. It looked like a monster to me, because it was too kind. Why do I feel like averting my eyes? Is it friendship, lust, or is it love? I wanted to know what love was and feel satisfied. Hey, does it exist? Love that isn't overbearing? Shio-chan, thanks for being with me. Our love will shine even brighter, forever in this cage. Satou-chan, did you really do it for me? are your eyes on me or yourself? Instead of loving in order to live, what if we could live and die in order to love? Satou-chan, Shio-chan, Satou-chan, Shio-chan. We're together forever, Satou-chan. This is my happy sugar life. What I am saying is, you're not supposed to look at this and go, oh yeah, that's a totally healthy relationship right there. No, it is uncomfortable by design. But I also see why Shio wouldn't want to leave Satou either. They're able to fill in the holes in each other's hearts, and give each of their lives meaning. But it's also obvious that they are not meant nor should be together. But damn, it's not hard to see why they need each other, why they want to help each other. It's because they don't want to be alone. And while it's not a good situation, to them, this is the ideal. And that's what I like about this story. It uses a lot of metaphors for a lot of things. For example, Matsuzaka and Kobe are types of beef, while Satou and Shio translate to sugar and salt. So you could say this is the story of sweet and salty beef coming together to make something work. But as how people see salt and sugar in real life, despite looking very similar and being used for similar purposes, they just aren't compatible when mixed together. All you get is something that is not just unappealing, but unappetizing. A perfect description for the relationship these two have. And because of this, much like when Kong fell for Anne, the moment when Satou met Shio, that is the moment when their downfall officially began. So, at this point, it's been about a year since Satou took Shio in. However, there is one loose thread that she needs to wrap up first. Asahi is still looking for Shio, and she needs him gone. So, having learned of Taio's brief encounter with her, Satou sees an opportunity, and begins trying to get Taio involved. It isn't until she texts him that she and Shoko are heading to her place that he comes out of his little cave, so to speak, and looks for the both of them. And upon seeing a poster, he comes to an epiphany, one he had much earlier. He can't do this. He can't get involved. He has to fix himself. He has to be better. So, with the poster in hand and a brand new resolve, he promises to overcome his PTSD, return to school, and become a respected individual once more. Until Satou shows up and goads him into relapse with one of Shio's socks. I think that's what it is. And he immediately revokes that promise for the chance to be Shio's knight in shining armor. All he has to do is get Asahi out of the district, and far away from the two of them. And though he is heavily suspicious that the guy that saved him just so happened to find a clue to Shio's whereabouts, he decides to follow it anyway, talking to Shoko one last time. Though the latter is still upset, believing she hurt Satou by not responding to her simple question of, "Do you still want to be my friend?" So much so, she believes she doesn't deserve to live. But Asahi comforts her, telling her how great of a person she is, and proceeds to finally explain why he is looking for Shio. You see, even though he's one of only two characters with truly good intentions, his main motivation in finding Shio is not because he's a good big brother, but because, much like the other characters, he just wants to fulfill his own fantasies. He's internalized the idea that Shio is the glue that kept the family together all those years, and believes finding her will magically fix everything. But as you could probably figure out now, even from the start, they never had the makings of a decent family, let alone a perfect one. Their whole family was built on a bad foundation, and it only grew worse thereon out. But this never comes across to him, the same way it might have with Shio. After all, it's as Asahi himself puts it, he doesn't know or understand what any kind of happiness is outside of living with his mother and sister. And everything else is meaningless. And it's in this moment we finally learn Asahi, this whole time, wasn't just holding on to hope, but clinging onto the ideal hope, purposefully blinding himself to the fact that his situation is better than it was before. He basically leaves his mom in the dust and forces himself to live as a homeless person just to find Shio. Too long didn't listen? He's not looking for Shio just to keep her safe, but also so he can fulfill his own fantasy of having the perfect family. As you can imagine, at best, this is incredibly self-serving. And doing this solely for his own happiness, all of a sudden turns this noble goal into a pretty selfish one. And in a way, him pretty much only wanting Shio to make him happy isn't too far off from why Satou keeps Shio locked up. I agree with him wanting to find her, but at the same time, I don't think he is the ideal caretaker she needs on that basis alone. So already, I lost a bit of the sympathy I had for the guy. But after hearing this confession, Shoko comforts him, telling him that she knows there is a light at the end of his tunnel, and makes him promise that by the end of all of this, he will smile. And so, the two kiss and agree to exchange phone numbers before he parts for the next district over. So with that out of the way, Satou returns to Shio, who asks if they could have a wedding, believing it'd be the ultimate vow to stay together. Satou agrees to this, and the two hug before Satou prepares to leave for the day. However, having become suspicious ever since Tayo got involved, someone decided to do their own investigation. And boy oh boy, did she find Satou's dirty little secret. Much to Satou's anger. Obviously, this leads to a heated argument between the two. Satou, angered by Shoko's second betrayal, you can't see that, I'm using air quotation marks, and Shoko, horrified that her best friend kidnapped a little girl, in which Satou simply responds by telling Shoko that she means as much to her as any other stranger on the streets. But Shoko doesn't care, and tells her to keep the phone as well as the photo, and tells her that she will bring her back to the light. She will save her friend. And in this moment, Shoko has done it. She has completed her story arc. She is no longer scared. She is now set on saving her friend. Shoko, who lived a strict life with very little personal freedom, with no friends to truly call her own, who only wanted to be friends with Satou, now has the proper determination and will to save Satou any way she can. And nothing will stop her from helping her best friend. Unfortunately for her, that best friend commits the ultimate betrayal. Yeah. In hindsight, those declarations she said about not wanting to live was more akin to foreshadow than self-hatred. Personally, I have not met or found anyone who wasn't shocked by Shoko's death. It is truly haunting and horrifying to watch, and I think it's like that because, up to this point, we have never seen any deaths on screen before or after this moment. And it wasn't done to a character who was either literally faceless or inconsequential to the plot. So to finally see someone die on screen, and with a named character we've been following since the very beginning, it's shocking. But what makes it even worse is that Shoko, as you'll soon see, was the only true sympathetic character outside of Shio. Her love for others is the only love we see in the story that is truly healthy, and all she ever wanted was to be happy and for others to be happy. She just wanted to have personal freedom, to live life like how she wanted to. And a lot of her personal growth does stem from her time with Satou, the same personal growth that led to her own untimely demise. It's good to note that Shoko is also used as a metaphor herself. Certain characters refer to her as a little birdie, one who sings and sings loudly. Even the song that plays during the argument right before her death is called Canary. So what does it mean? Basically, back in the old days, coal miners would take canaries down into the mine shafts with them as an early warning system, as they are exceptionally sensitive to the gases that build up in coal mines. So, if the canary died, the miners would know it's time to get the hell out. So, they're basically saying every time Shoko tried prying into Satou's life, she was like that canary being lowered into the mine shafts, and eventually, she paid the price for it. But what happened has happened. The damage is done. Shoko is dead. But her death was not in vain, because this moment completely changes the course of the story. For you see, this moment is following up on something earlier from the story, where Satou, after hearing an injured Asahi reciting the vow that she and Shio have, almost brings herself to bludgeoning the guy to death with a crowbar. But she is able to stop herself when she realizes what the repercussions of this would be, and so regains self-control. But in this brief moment, where Satou was exposed to someone at her most vulnerable, she lost that self-control, and now her friend, her co-worker, the daughter of a wealthy family, is dead. And while nobody expects anything right now, people will start questioning both where Shoko is, and people are inevitably going to start asking Satou about where she last saw her. Naturally, this whole event leads to Satou basically going catatonic, just processing the fact that she alone just uprooted her own happy sugar life. But the fact that Satou is left unresponsive after murdering Shoko in cold blood does suggest she may have cared more about Shoko than she initially let on. She did genuinely enjoy her time with them, and more than likely did care for her in their own way. So, in all honesty, this says more about Satou as the broken and confused person that she is, as opposed to Satou, the anti-villain. Because she is still capable of showing some form of remorse. So while Satou is having her breakdown, Shio tries to go about their normal life, cleaning up the house, confused as to why Satou says they need a new castle, but deciding to help out wherever they can. It's at this point Shio finally starts realizing something more is up and wants to know what is going on. But Satou, once again, just tells her it's alright. Just as long as you're happy, I'm happy. And once again justifies what she has done by telling herself, what I'm doing is for love, and that's all I need. But Shio is having none of it. She's tired of the secret. She wants to help Satou, and just being told to smile and say her name, this tells her a lot more than anything else. She is just an object to Satou. And when Satou simply responds all she wants from Shio is for her to be happy, Shio just walks away, madder than she was before, simply declaring to Satou that she is nothing more than a doll to her. And this breaks Satou. Up until this moment, all she wanted was for Shio to be happy so she can be happy, and always found ways of justifying it. But now, that's not the case anymore. She has genuinely upset Shio and knows that she is the reason for it. Because of this, she finally enters what is essentially a mental and emotional breakdown, questioning what she has done wrong. Also, I love the little detail of what appears to be Shoko's ghost staring down at her friend, almost as if she herself is disappointed in Satou. But after a while, things calm down, and they eventually speak to each other again. They apologize to each other, and Shio states that if they're going to live together, she herself should also know what's going on, and wants to shoulder whatever burden Satou is going through too. Shio, despite this not being the ideal thing to do, is right. If you're going to live with someone or be involved with someone else, you can't just shoulder all the burdens by yourself. And so, for the first time in the entire story, Satou finally comes clean and confesses to what she has done, finally realizing that she, this whole time, had only harmed her own happy sugar life. And in a way, she also realizes that goes for everyone else as well. The people she's lied to, the people she manipulated, the person she killed. She is finally realizing that what she was doing was wrong and could never be justified. This is a true moment of character development, and this is what makes Satou stand out from every other villain I know of so much. Her complex morality and profound depth as a character adds a nice touch of unpredictability to the story as a whole, which is made even better because she is not a static character. Throughout the manga and anime, Satou grows significantly as a person. Her journey, her evolution from a seemingly normal girl to a complex, morally gray protagonist that finds ways of justifying the atrocities she commits, to someone who is forced to endure the consequences of her actions before her pivotal moment of self-discovery, makes her honestly one of the few villains I've seen that undergoes a dynamic character evolution quite like this. In fact, she's probably the only one. And while a lot of people may not like her, there is no denying just how well written she is. Getting back on track, after coming to an understanding, both Satou and Shio agree to work together to fix this problem. And by fix, I mean hide the evidence and run away to Gur for Jickelstan or something. Hey, I said she was growing as a person, not becoming a better one. There is a difference. But Satou knows this will not be simple. She knows that in order to pull this off, she must make a deal with the devil. And so, she returns to the lion's den, so to speak, to see the one person that could help her. The one who made her the way she is today.
あら、どうしたの?
So, Satou explains what happened, and because the aunt often affiliates with people who have done similar things, agrees to help. But gets pretty mad once Satou declares her love to be wrong. The aunt once again shows her true colors, and starts mocking her niece, stating that she is still a child who needs adults for help. This finally causes Satou to snap, and in her usual Satou way, threatens the aunt and tells her, "I am like this because of you. I am your responsibility. Take some responsibility for once, you..."
Dense, irritating miniature beast of burden!
This too is a moment of character growth, because with Shio now taking more of a presence in their life together, she had to confront her own personal problems. In this case, confronting her own metaphorical devil, and not only one, but force them into compliance. By doing this, alone in the latter's home turf, she faced her own PTSD, not just for Shio, for her own sake as well. But even with that done, it will not be easy, because before Shoko died, she was able to send that picture she took straight to Asahi. And where things are changing, arguably, for the better within Satou's mind, it's the reverse for Asahi. Now knowing where she's at, he lures Tayo into a trap to get him to confess, where... Ah!
お前からは汚れた大人の匂いがする。俺はもうお前を信用しない。
All of a sudden, that boy determined to find his sister is no longer there. He's starting to show more psychopathic tendencies, acting the same way that Satou does, even threatening physical violence and torture if Tayo doesn't comply with his orders. This is actually a common trope when it comes to the old, tried and true tale of the hero's journey. The shapeshifter. Not like a werewolf or anything, but more or less when a character changes roles in the story. You know, a warrior seeking vengeance becomes a hero seeking justice, a henchman becomes an ally, and in this case, the hero becomes the villain. He's basically gone from a heroic antagonist to a straight-up antagonist. So much so that he's showing a cruel, heartless, and outright ugly side he never showed prior. Like, it's clear to everyone Tayo's underwent something truly traumatic and Satou is just using it to her advantage. But he does not care. He no longer resembles that boy we met. and instead looks more reminiscent of the other psychos we've seen. Or, dare I say it, his father?
Dramatic reverb.
Yeah, needless to say, a lot more of that sympathy I had for him just went down the drain. Because while Satou is a constantly bad person that is now trying to improve herself in her own weird way, Asahi is basically stepping down to her level for no other reason than so I can be happy. Once again, I agree he should get Shio back, but the reason and methodology he's using is for all the wrong reasons. So, with Taiyo under his thumb with the threat of having his fingernails ripped out, Taiyo heads back to work to find her address, but also learns that both Satou and Shoko have not been able to come into work as of late. Disregarding the thought, he finds what he's looking for and sets out to the address on paper. However, after a brief moment of clarity, he realizes he doesn't have to take orders from Asahi. He doesn't have to take orders from anyone. He never did. But the thing is, despite him being offered his job back with obviously higher pay, and being able to just go home and not get involved with any of this like he originally planned, he decides he is just going to find Shio himself. And this is it, folks. This is the moment Taiyo passes the event horizon, so to speak. This isn't him simply relapsing. This is him willfully choosing to throw away all that he had promised and vowed to improve on just so he can fulfill his own desperate desires. He is literally throwing his life, his future away just to continue his unhealthy obsession. He no longer cares about anything but himself. And this is what leads to his downfall. He goes to the apartment, but finds no one is there. That's because, if you remember, Satou uses a different address to hide where she is currently living. So, the apartment he went to isn't Satou's, and it instead belongs to someone else.
あなたも愛に飢えているの？
And so, he is kidnapped and violated a second time. And if you think the first time broke him, then the second time completely destroys him. And when he finally calls Asahi for help and tells him where he is, Asahi doesn't believe him because the addresses are not the same, and simply leaves him to suffer whatever fate may befall him. Once again, this is really sociopathic. Satou can be a cruel individual, but she isn't without remorse. This also leads to a theme I only just noticed on rewatch. But Shoko and Taiyo can also be seen as a cautionary tale about getting involved in things you shouldn't. Or, in both of these cases specifically, why you shouldn't pry into other people's lives any further than they want you to. Because you may not like what you will find. Taiyo goes looking for Shio. He finds the aunt instead. Shoko finds Satou with Shio. She dies as a result. You get the picture. In other words, both were like canaries entering the same coal mine, so to speak, even though they didn't have to, and suffered horribly because of it. But before all that happened, Satou, Shio, and the aunt have been busy, buying up gasoline, throwing away anything that may lead back to them. We even see Sumair one last time, being tricked into giving Satou her and her sister's passports as a way to get out of the country, only telling her girlfriend, quote, that she'll call them when they get there. She absolutely won't, but what else do you expect from Satou at this point? And after having their own little makeshift wedding, vowing to once again never leave each other, also, because I'm obligated to continue this joke, everything is set. The aunt is ready to play her part. The two are ready to leave, and all three are ready to enact their plan. Dress Shoko stiff in one of Satou's outfits and set the place on fire to make it look like Satou burned to death while both run away. All Satou has left to do is play a little dress up, getting one last look at the woman she called friend. Even though she claims to feel nothing for Shoko, the face doesn't lie. She clearly does have regret for killing her. She just denies it. But before she does, she takes her wedding ring off as not to dirty it. And this is where she finally slips up. It's only at the airport she realizes she's missing the ring, and with Shio's provocation, they go back for it. This following sequence is different in the manga, so I'll focus on that version here. Depending on which one you look at, Asahi either enters the apartments after they return, or before they do, but both lead to a similar set of events. The only difference is that he discovers Shoko's body a lot earlier in the manga, and the events leading up to the climax play out differently because of that. In the anime, they just get the ring and leave. In the manga, when they finally return to get the ring, Satou notices something is off. Shoko's eyes are now closed, and her wound has been cleaned, something she did not do, while Shio discovers a note. A note from Asahi basically saying, "I know where you are, it's time to come home." What would normally be a moment of joy or relief in most other stories is a moment of horror for Shio. You see, when she was with Yuna, she would always be told that her brother would one day come and make everything better. But he never did come for them when she was with Yuna. So, by this time, when he basically makes his presence known, he is no longer someone good or heroic in her eyes. Instead, he is a threat. And I do personally think that the fact that Shio was so young when Asahi made that promise probably plays a factor as to why she doesn't want to go back with him. So, with this realization, they try to leave as fast as possible. But once they reach the bottom, guess who's already there waiting for them? While this is going down, the aunt finally enacts her part of the plan. Cornered and neither wanting anything to do with him, they run off back into the building, planning on hiding in the aunt's apartment. But once they get there, they are confronted by Taiyo. In the anime, he's just being a creep like usual before they run off again. In the manga, he actually manages to corner Shio and demands she purify him of his ruined body, or else he'll do it himself.
That's disturbing.
But before Satou can go berserk again, Shio, remaining calm, tells him frankly and to the point, "I cannot fix you, for I too am impure," before running off to rejoin with Satou, leaving Taiyo behind as his mind shatters for the final time. This is a stark contrast from the way Shio was when we first met her. She was weak, cowardly, and couldn't do anything really. But with Satou by her side, someone she trusts, she actually shows a sense of agency that one would describe as only an adult having. Also, if you're wondering what happens to Taiyo, The aunt finds him and hands him over to the paramedics. But with the building burning, passages being blocked, and Asahi pursuing the two with full intent on basically killing one of them on sight, the two are forced to keep fleeing through the building as it continues to smolder. This eventually leads to a point where both are cornered and Asahi is finally able to reach them, which results in Satou having to defend herself from Asahi's assaults. And seeing the viciousness behind her brother's attacks only brings back the terrible memories of what their father would do to Yuna, something even he starts to realize but refuses to acknowledge. And as someone who's pretty versed in versus debating, I can tell you right now that pitting a tiny, petite woman with only her bare hands against a larger, stronger male with a baseball bat can only end one way. Also, kudos to the music, because it does sell the severity of the entire situation. Sorry, getting off topic again. But yeah, Satou, despite her many victories prior, finally loses the battle. And Asahi is ready to take Shio away, but not before making the final blow. Except Shio refuses and firmly stands in defiance to protect Satou, and even acknowledges that Satou has murdered someone, but still decrees her to be their one and only. Asahi quickly deduces that she's acting like this because of what Yuna did to her, and he finally tells her the full story of what actually happened that night. You see, Yuna never actually said she didn't want Shio anymore. That was how Shio heard it. She was actually saying Shio didn't need her anymore. Yuna abandoned Shio because she realized she was becoming like her husband, and was scared of doing the same things to Shio that her husband did to them. But it doesn't just end there, because we also learn what else happened that fateful night. With nothing left to live for, nothing else left to lose, she can finally bring herself to do something. Something that, in hindsight, she should have done long ago. Yuna chose to murder her husband to free both her and their children from his shadow. And in doing so, made it inevitable that she will be discovered as the culprit, and be arrested for her husband's murder. She basically threw away whatever life she had left for the sake of her children. While it doesn't make up for how she treated Shio last they interacted, it reminds us that everyone in the family, be it Shio, Asahi, or even Yuna, were all victims. And through this revelation, Shio remembers some of the good times she's had with Asahi. And now that the story is told, and she is stuck between a rock and a hard place, Shio must make a choice. Stay with Satou and certainly perish, or go with Asahi and certainly live. And so, she makes a choice.
お兄ちゃん、
シオ。
母さんに伝えて。私を不幸から解き放ってくれてありがとうって。だから、私は私のために生きる。
Honestly, while I don't agree with her choosing Satou, I don't blame her for making that decision either. While Asahi was desperate for a reunion with his sister, but as you could clearly see, that feeling was not mutual. During those 12 months she spent with Satou, it changed her. And despite the imprisonment, the lies, and the murder, Shio's well-being was always Satou's top priority. And while Asahi always kept Shio in mind, Shio never gave off any inkling that she had any interest in going back to her family. She never once thought about them, yearned to see them, nor is it shown she ever really cared for them. While it was a clearly screwed up situation, to her, Satou was that perfect family. She took her off the streets. She did everything she could to support her, even to the point of overworking herself every single day. Why? Because taking care of Shio was her #1 priority. Satou was happy when Shio was happy. Satou has done more for her than her family ever did. And after all that happened, going from the arguably better life she had with Satou back to the old one she used to live, she could never do that, for she would never be happy with them, and makes it very clear to her brother she isn't going anywhere. Also, gotta love this shot. The windows showing you how equally broken they are, but also how equally separated they are. Eventually, as the building crumbles around them, both are able to escape Asahi, trapping themselves on the rooftop of their now burning castle as a result, only able to look down at the panic below. Satou laments over the fact that their plan fell apart, but Shio comforts her, telling her how happy and grateful she was to have met Satou, even acknowledging how much happier both of them are ever since they met each other, and how they both brought so much meaning and joy to each other's lives, and how both gave the other a reason to keep on living. And as the fire burns, they share a brief moment with each other, where Shio starts asking a question that I think everyone has at one point asked in their life. What is it like to die, and what happens after we die? Satou simply replies, probably from experience, it only hurts for a moment, and then it's over. And as for what happens after, she does not know. But with their ends pretty much guaranteed, and only 2 options available, Shio suggests to Satou that, since she is happiest with her, they should die together. And after a brief moment where they once again tell each other how much they mean to the other, they head for the ledge. And so, things have come full circle. We finally return to the beginning. Or more aptly, the end, if we go by the anime. Satou's funny little story has come to an end, where the two have decided death by terminal velocity would be a more pleasant way to go than being roasted on an open fire. To them, a lover's leap, if you would, is the only fitting way for their story to end. And with each other, hand in hand, they jump off into the abyss below. As they plummet, Satou can only think of how grateful she was to have experienced all the feelings she has. Joy, jealousy, regret, and the one that some people would call love. She is happy for what little time she spent with Shio, and thinks how lucky she was to have had Shio teach her what it meant to truly love something, to love someone for the first time in her life. All the while thinking about the life she could have had with Shio had their ill-fated plan worked out. Before everything fades to white and only one thought goes through her mind. All of a sudden, a new feeling flows through her body. A feeling that demands, no, screams that she must keep Shio safe at all costs, even in the face of death. The feeling is foreign to her, but Satou already knows what it is. This weird, strange new feeling, this is the true feeling of love. And at long last, Satou is finally satisfied. And so, she looks to Shio one last time, asking her to continue loving them when they are reborn, before giving her one last smile and holding her as close and as tight as possible, grateful for being born just for this one fleeting moment before telling her, "I'm sorry, thank you, and goodbye." Honestly, I've never seen any scene in anything that was able to break me quite like this. Like, if you hear my voice breaking or choking up, that's not acting. That's me actually trying to compose myself. It's hard to describe, but it's more like I don't cry because of Satou, but more so because I cry for Satou. And I think that's because Happy Sugar Life actually took its time to earn this moment, to show us why she is the way she was, to show us the few traits that made her different from most other monsters. And in the end, while what she did was unforgivable, I can't honestly say, in good conscience, blame her for just wanting to feel loved, and to love in return. In a way, this actually parallels Asahi, because both come from abusive upbringings that ruined their lives, and both escaping it to find someone or something to truly love is what drove them to the lengths they went to. And even though Asahi was ultimately more in the right than Satou was, both only wanted Shio just so they could be happy. The difference is that in the moment she and Shio threw themselves off the roof, Satou realized what true love is, and decided she'd rather have Shio live without her instead of both being together in death, making it the first time she's denied one of Shio's requests. And Satou proved that the love she felt for Shio, in a weird, twisted way, was indeed genuine, and did it with a smile. It's this moment that makes you realize that while Satou was not a good person, there were shreds of a decent person that, had their life been different, could have led to her being that well-respected individual people saw her as. I feel like now would be a good time to bring up my personal 2 favorite soundtracks from the show. You know, outside of Bitter, 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 One Room Sugar Life, and Sweet Hurt. When translated, the former is sung from Satou's point of view. How she never knew what it was like to love someone, and now that they found it, their life is so much sweeter. And they just want to keep it all to themselves, and pretend the rest of the world outside their cage doesn't exist. And even though she knows what she is doing is wrong, she just doesn't care because she is happy now. The latter, on the other hand, while not from that same POV, it is implied to be. It instead tells us a tale of a fallen angel who just had their wings removed, their life shattered because of what they did. But because of the love they felt, they don't regret it. And whatever divine punishment they face, they want to do it together with the one they love. But if something were to happen, and their time together should ever come to an end, she will happily be the one to give up everything to the one who gave them everything. Put back to back, these two songs basically weave the tale of Satou herself, and the journey she would go on. And it fits perfectly. Why? Because, just as this unfortunate tale told by song says, she was more than willing to give up everything for the one who gave her everything. And this includes her life. After all, isn't that what people say? If you love something, set it free? This moment reminds you that Satou was not truly a monster, but was instead the scariest creature to ever walk the earth. The kind of creature that makes true monsters tremble before their feet. She was human. A confused, broken human who was no different from you and I, who just wanted to feel loved. After all, as this guy puts it, love sacrifices for love. Love is sacrifice. Love is complicated. But another reason why I think this moment works is not just because it brings Satou's character full circle and provides a fitting defeat for our villain, but because it also does not use this moment to excuse Satou from what she did. Yeah, unlike so many of the tragic villains we see nowadays, whose one singular moment of doing something legitimately good or selfless is used to excuse them of their wrongdoings, Happy Sugar Life doesn't do that. Satou caused a lot of damage, and that damage can never be undone. In the end, no one gets a happy ending because of Satou. Satou is dead, Shoko is dead, Sumair, learning that her supposed lover is dead, will without a doubt suffer emotional damage from it. Yuna will certainly be arrested for her husband's murder. Countless lives were either extinguished or ruined by the fire. And Tayo, poor Tayo, is left catatonic and will most likely never, ever recover from the events of that fateful night. Unless you go with the manga, where he is instead reduced to an unhinged lunatic after his last interaction with Shio. But not everything is entirely bad. Somehow, for whatever reason, maybe because of the fire or not, the teacher is outed for his crimes in front of his family, and is finally arrested. And the aunt is arrested for her involvement in the fire. And even though she can just say it was Satou's idea, she doesn't do that. She refuses to cooperate and forces the investigation to keep on going for years on end. All in order to protect her niece's image. So, in a weird way, kind of like Satou with Shio, the aunt did care for her in some weird, depraved way. But in the end, Satou may have done one good thing that left one person better off, but the scars, the pain, and the memories of that night will always remain. But we're not done yet, because there are still 2 players left. After 5 years of being at the mercy of his father, and an additional year of sleeping under park benches, starvation, and being beaten by thugs, Asahi has finally done it. And with Satou out of the way, nothing can stand between him and his long-promised happy ending. So he goes to the hospital. He finds Shio's room. He enters and approaches her, and tells them that everything will be alright. They can now be a family again, and asks her to come back home, so they can be a family again. At first, Shio doesn't even seem to notice him, only staring at her mother through the nearby window. But after a brief moment, she turns to her brother and gives him her answer.
ごめんね、私。そういうのはもうやめたの。だって私は生まれ変わったんだから。
Shio, once again, coldly rejects him a second time. And it's only now that he realizes that he was too late. Asahi is left truly alone, with nothing left to live for. The promise he made to Shoko is ultimately unkempt because of this. Asahi just exists now. In a tragic role reversal, one that presumably breaks his outlook on the world, to Shio, the sister he fought so hard to find, he was the villain. He was the one that threatened their happy sugar life, and he was the one who ultimately broke it. And it was her rejection that, presumably, made him finally realize she was never the one holding their family together. For they were already broken. And that this entire time, for 6 straight years, he had gambled all of his happiness on a losing hand. A hand that was already lost. The damage had been done. Satou has left their mark on Shio. She will spend the rest of her life reminiscing about her imprisonment and the time she spent with her captor until the day they reunite with each other. By the end, she will never be a normal person, if she ever was a normal person. Shio is forever tied to a rock she will never escape from. Or perhaps, did this rock instead free her? This scene has been interpreted in one of 2 ways. The first, and most accepted, being that Shio has Stockholm Syndrome. But as dramatic as the Stockholm Syndrome theory is, it doesn't exactly fit with the ending. Because in the manga, the scene plays out differently. Shio simply leaves Asahi for destinations unknown. But we do see the full impact Satou left on Shio in epilogues. Just months after Satou's demise, Shio is by herself, living her own life completely without fear. Not even caring when a robber puts a knife to her neck and takes her hostage, and escapes by just not giving a crap. She is doing what she said she would. She is living for herself now, for her own sake. And 8 years later, we see Shio, now as old as Satou was, having a healthy social life, where she continues to push herself to do her best, to be like Satou. Not Satou the psychopath, but Satou the woman who can do anything. While yes, her time with Satou was far from a good influence, she can look back on those memories fondly, unlike literally everyone else, and used those memories to become a strong, independent woman, and uses the love she felt for and from Satou as a motivation to keep on living. In a weird way, all that happened between them may have actually helped Shio become a better person. She's not obsessive like Satou, presumably, desperate like Taio, nor places her happiness solely on another person like Asahi. In the end, maybe Satou did have the last laugh, because Shio will always be tied to her metaphorical rock. But in return, maybe this new rock, in a weird way, set Shio free from the cycle of abuse, violence, and unhappiness she was born into. The one Yuna could not escape from lest she commit a terrible act herself. The one Asahi was defined by with his ill-fated promise. The one Satou was molded by. The one that Shio no longer wants anything to do with. And whether or not Shio knew it, cutting ties with the people, the family that risked dragging her back into that cycle, or even a similar one, was the first true steps towards living a happier, healthier life. By the end, there was nothing Asahi could do to get Shio to come back. All he could do was make her situation a little better. Sure, she may not be right in the head. Satou will always be her one-all, be-all to end-all. Satou will always be her angel. But at least Shio can think that as a free person. At their end, Satou gave them their life so she could keep on living. And because of that, Shio did. And in a weird way, she also ends up fulfilling her brother's one wish of not growing up to be like him. She now lives a happier, far more fulfilled life than both, while he's still presumably scraping by on the streets somewhere. Shio, because of a series of unfortunate events that she and no one else should ever have to go through, is no longer trapped to such an unfortunate fate. And after all is said and done, I'm just left with one question. That question isn't, is Shio broken? That's pretty easy to figure out. No. The question I'm left with is, Shio is free. But at what cost?
ずーっと一緒だよ、サトちゃん。これが私のハッピーシュガーライフ。
Man, this went on way longer than I expected it to. It's probably for the best that I start wrapping this up now. Given its subject matter, I imagine that Happy Sugar Life is not going to be for everyone. But I think that is the reason why it has really haunted me, and I keep coming back to it. I can't deny just how intricate, subtle, terrifying, well-written, thought-provoking, and just overall engaging this whole story was. I previously mentioned in my short-form review, this gave me a similar experience I had with The Plague Dogs Uncut. And to give better clarification, that is high praise coming from me because that is my favorite movie, period. And Happy Sugar Life, though unfortunately misunderstood and tossed to the wayside by many, is in my opinion one of the best horror stories I have ever seen. And I hope one day people are willing to look back and re-examine it and see it for the underrated masterpiece that it truly is. And to all who watched this, stay warm, know that you are loved, and let it be said that we should all take strides to hold on to our sanity, our happiness, and those we truly cherish, so that way we don't end up living out our very own happy sugar life. Whew, that took a lot out of me. So much so, I completely forgot why I rented out this Airbnb in the first place. Oh yeah, I did all this just so I can have appropriate atmosphere so I can do this. Well, it's definitely a step up from a still PNG with googly eyes at least. In any case, thank you for watching this video, and I hope to see you again in future projects I have. Now, with that out of the way, I have, other things to attend to.